my role as the member of Governor Ray's staff who dealt with crisis situations, with natural disasters, with emergencies. I had covered and helped organize the security for the Pope's visit, dealt with getting assistance out during devastating tornadoes that ripped through our state in 1979. And another moment like this came in September of 1981. And they always seemed to happen when the governor was away and was difficult to contact him. Governor Ray had been, and I had been with him, at the Midwest Governors Conference in Milwaukee. I flew back to Des Moines that morning, September 2nd, and the governor, though, was being driven. He had several family members with him, and a state trooper was driving the van, and they were driving back from Milwaukee, take 5-6 hours to make the trip back to Des Moines, and so it would be fine. Except when I landed at the airport, members of the governor's staff were there, told me we had to rush to the office. There was a riot at the Fort Madison State Penitentiary. And when I got there, the governor was, we couldn't reach him or communicate with him. In those days, the lieutenant governor was not part of the administration, had no power in this. And we're there in the governor's office, the staff arrayed around the table. And I stood up and said, well, here's the situation. We're opening the Emergency Operations Center. My very good friend, Mike Regan, who was the director of the Department of Human Services that oversaw the operation of the prisons, was headed there, said, I'm going there. I'm taking the governor's press secretary with me. I've called the head of the Commissioner of Public Safety, the head of the State Patrol, the Adjutant General of the National Guard to come and be with me as we deal with this situation. We never had this before where the governor couldn't be reached, but I had to step in, not be the governor, not play the role of the governor, but deal with the decisions that had to be made, the life and death decisions that would have to be made. We got to the operations center and we had a open phone line to the part of the penitentiary, the warden's office, which was still under control of the warden and his force, but now prisoners had taken over most of the cell blocks, many of the administrative buildings of the penitentiary. And the warden was dealing with the leaders of the rioting prisoners who were now demanding to have access to the press to be able to tell their grievances. And they had guards as hostages. They had weapons taken from the guards. They were holding the guards as their hostages. And I remember being there by the open phone as the message came from the warden saying, the prisoner said we have to have access to the press or we're going to kill the guards. So once again, here I was like I had been in Vietnam and others, confronted with essentially what would be a life or death situation, a life or death decision that would have to be made. And so, looking at Mike Regan and sensing we would be on the same page, I just said, let them in. Give them the access they want. Let the press in. Now, at the same time, we're trying desperately to reach the governor. Phones, there weren't cell phones in those days. There weren't connections. The best we could do was hope to sync up with the state police radios with the radio that the governor's state patrolman had, but which didn't work, didn't link when he was in the middle of Wisconsin. And we didn't know which bridge the governors would come across. Would he come across at Gutenberg? Would he come across at Dubuque? Would he go down and come across at Davenport? And so we sent state patrolmen to every bridge get on the radio, make contact with the governor, find out where he is, so we can send helicopter to pick him up, bring him back, a plane to pick him up, bring him back to Des Moines, get him to our operations center. At the same time, had to be making decisions about what to do about dealing with this terrible situation inside Fort Madison. So it takes the governor to call the National Guard to active state duty. We weren't in touch with the governor, but we didn't require the governor to send state troopers. And so, turning to Bill Miller, the Commissioner of Public Safety, with whom I work very closely, we said, alert the entire state patrol with their assault weapons in the trunk and their protective gear, and start driving from all across the state to Fort Madison. So we will have a police assault force assembled in several hours to be able to retake the prison and reassert control over it. Military personnel cannot, in the United States, be used in police function. Military, the National Guard, can't be sent to assault the prison and retake it from the prisoners, but they can provide the support. And so we prepared with the Adjutant General the plan that once we were in touch with the governor and he could call them to state service, that we would fly Army helicopters, Army National Guard helicopters to Fort Madison, and Air National Guard lighting systems to go from Des Moines there, so we could use the Air Guard, which is almost never called a state service, to illuminate the prison, Army helicopters to lift the state troopers over the wall and into the prison. Shortly after noon, we were in contact with the governor. We arranged to fly him back, and I remember when he came into the operations center, and Mike Regan and I were briefing him on where we stood, what was happening. We got him to give the order, so I could give it to the Adjutant General, who's right there. You're now authorized. Bring the Air Guard, or the helicopter units to Fort Madison. Bring the Air Guard lighting, searchlights, spotlights there, the radio we would need. And that night, at dark, with the prison illuminated, the helicopters picked up, filled with state troopers, wearing their protective gear with their rifles and shotguns, and lifted over the wall and into the yard. And the operation, the show of force, caused the rioting prisoners to throw down their weapons, come out with their hands up, surrender, release all the guards, the hostages, none of whom were harmed. There was one prisoner found dead who had been murdered for whatever reason by the prisoners. But all in all, the Fort Madison prison riot was resolved without any loss of life on the part of those guards who had been held as hostages. And I had been in the middle of this, working so closely and cooperatively with Mike Regan, the Commissioner of Public Safety, with the Adjutant General of the National Guard, all of whom I had these very effective relationships with, and with the trust and confidence of Governor Ray. It was an amazing experience.